CC.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the talk. Very good. One of the things I noticed is my family is, at least half of my family is Norwegian American, and they really weren't big on talking about the past. I think, is that something that was very typical of people at that time?
I would say yes, partly because many of my readers have said this to me, especially those of Norwegian descent. They've said, you have filled in the story no one ever talked about. And I actually wrote a blog about this because one woman emailed me and she said, I remember my Norwegian grandparents, or maybe her great grandparents, as I was a little girl, and they would come for holiday dinners and they would sit silently in the corner and they never spoke. And they may not have spoken very good English, to be honest, but she said, I never knew what their story was. And in fact, when the women I met in IPPY who told me their family's immigration stories, these stories are very stripped down. They were like, they came in a wagon with 2 oxen from Decorah, Iowa in this year, and then they settled here. Like, there was not a lot of emotionality to it. I really turned to literature to fill in some of those gaps. There's a wonderful book, which I think I have right here. I should have pulled it out. It's called, it's by Agathe Rain, Raaen. And the title is something like, the grass, something about the grass, but it is a first person, is a memoir really of her growing up on a very poor South Dakota farm in a Norwegian family, and her father is an alcoholic, a fairly well educated Norwegian who really doesn't want to be stuck farming, and he mortgages the farm against his wife's desires, and then he drinks all the money they make every year. And the wife and Agathe and her family are very poor, and they really struggle to get out from under the debt of the mortgage. And her father's alcoholism is a serious problem. The family is shunned from the church because of his problems. And books like that gave me a much better insight into what it was really like, how harrowing it was. Also, Giants in the Earth by O.E. Rovag was very helpful, although that was an earlier, that story is set somewhat earlier. And although it's written in the 1930s, so it's not really a firsthand account. So I did find that there were a lot of facts and interesting detail about life back then in immigrant stories, but there was very little talk about how anyone felt about it, except I knew things like the first public institution Minnesota ever built was a insane asylum, and it was filled mostly with failing Norwegian farmers. There was a big problem with suicide out on the prairie. There were all kinds of, there was a lot of despair among women. And one of the things I do in the book is I have Nora starts to work with despairing women. And this is, I did this because my older sister said to me one day, so, okay, you get Nora out on the prairie. What's she gonna do out there? Just make soap? And I said, well, she can't make soap? Is that what you're saying? Anne said, no, it's just, this is Nora Helmer. She's got to do something more significant than make soap. So I'd always been intrigued by how women have always known how to care for each other. Some of it is beyond words. It's coming in to help cook and clean if there's been a tragedy in the family. Some of it is helping women bathe if they are so depressed they can't get undressed, things like that. So this sort of organic kind of caring for women that 19th century women knew how to do in an emergency. And so I have, Nora goes through a crisis, and a woman cares for her, and she then comes out of that and learns how to do that for other women in crisis. Because if you really look at the the true story of the prairie, it was a dismal place, and it was particularly rough on poor women, and people were poor. They were, I mean, every year, the whole idea of whether or not the harvest came in with enough to get you through the next winter, that was a question every single fall. Do we have enough to live through the next winter? And it was a very difficult way of life.
Yeah, that was the Giants of the Earth has a lot of the hardness of life on the prairie,
Yeah,
as opposed
definitely.
to Little House on the Prairie, which is more the Reader's Digest version. So,
Well,
and other-
in Laura Ingalls Wilder's defense, she was writing for children, but when you
oh,
learn more about what actually happened to her family and what she left out, that she had a brother that died, that she was sent out as a servant child when she was like 11 to work in other people's homes. I mean, she left all that out. So that's kind of interesting.
any other questions? Cece, can you unmute yourself? You have to
There
unmute.
we go. Okay. Yeah, three things. Number one, you said you had photos from as Nora would have taken them. But
Yes, it's called
did you
Nora's Journey.
what about the photographer in your story?
I don't have photos for Solvi. I had to, when I was trying to come up with the Nora's, I came up with the idea of Nora's Journey, to have something to sort of add photographs to the website. I'm such a word person that the whole visual side of things is a little bit of a challenge for me. And honestly, when I was in Norway and in Minnesota doing my research, this was like 12 years ago. It was sort of before Instagram, it was before Facebook, and I didn't think, oh, I need to get beautiful photos to use on my website. I didn't think that way at all. I took pictures of things so that I could remember details. That was the only reason I took pictures. So I have a lot of pictures of things like furniture and what houses look like and stuff like that. So when I was putting together Nora's Journey, at first I was intrigued about Solvi and her photography, but her photography would be much harder to stage because she's capturing people at work. And in fact, I found it easier to leave her photography to the description so that the reader could imagine them. But I've had other readers say to me, oh, I wish I could see Solvi's photography book. And I do too. I wish I actually had these photos. I looked at a lot of photos from that period to see what people were doing. And this is interesting. I didn't know this until I was researching it, but the Brownie camera came out before World War I. And the Brownie camera, I didn't give Solvi a Brownie because her father had a better quality German camera, but the Brownie camera sort of democratized photography. So all of a sudden, people are taking pictures of their siblings in the backyard, goofing around, stuff like that, and that hadn't really been a subject of photography before then. So she is of that generation who thinks of photography differently than formal photographers.
And you had to sit there for 18 minutes and don't move.
Yeah, back to the days of daguerreotype.
There was something else I heard from Norwegians who had come across was they had the humped chest. And I said, why is it all these Norwegian chests I see have a curved top? Is that the way you did it in Norway? And he said, no, you did that so that you would have your chest would be on top, because they couldn't stack anything on top of it if it had a curved top.
Oh, I wish I'd known that. That's great.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the thing is that I lived for 20 something years in Minot, North Dakota, and was a volunteer every year of it with the Norse Kustfest, one way or the other.
I've
And
heard
the
of
Norse
it.
Kustfest, yes. Minot is a town of 35,000 souls, or was when I got there. It had fewer people than I attended the University of Maryland with. And I attended when I was 20 something, 19, 20, at the proper time. And this town is smaller than my school was. It swelled to over 60,000 every year. We had the Princess of Norway come a couple of times. We had the King and Queen come one year of Norway. Bus tours and so forth. This year it canceled. When they canceled it in February, early February, we all said, "Oh, this coronavirus is a bad thing. If they're canceling Hustfest, this is a bad thing."
I would love to go to Hustfest sometime.
That's it's fabulous. Every hall is a different, is named for a different capital city, and everything. Oh, and the people we've got, the headliners we've got coming every year. But this is where I have found a lot of my information and found from this trunk. Craftsmen doing everything, but everything is set in the 1800s, rigidly, just about. And the Norwegians who come over to visit, Scandinavians who come over say, "We have nothing like this at home. We don't do this. We've passed on, we've moved on. Okay, we live in the 20th and 21st century. We don't live in
the 19th
century. So this is very fun for us to come over here and move back into the past with you." And the reason is that the Scandinavians in this country sort of stick their memories to that period when the ancestors came over here. That's what they remember of the old country, is when the family came, and that's where the stories started, where the food ends. You know, that's where the lefts and everything date from that period.
I hope to see you at Hustfest next year.
If it's on,
hopefully, fingers crossed.
Any other questions? Okay. I just wonder, you've written the book, it's published. Do you ever think about, well, gee, I wish I included this, or do you ever second guess yourself on what you wrote, or do you pretty much stay with it?
I worked on it for for 10 years pretty much. And I wrote the Nora story first, and then I decided I needed the secondary storyline. So then I had to write the Solvi story, which was almost like its own novel, because it had to be strong enough to balance the Nora storyline. And then I saw these wonderful sort of, connections. I was building that in, these connections between the two storylines. So by the time I finished, I just worked on it for so long. I mean, people ask me, how many versions did you do? And all I can say is every day I got up and I sat down and I opened the book and I changed something. So, like I did that for 10 years. So I don't really anymore have any second guessing. I didn't release the book until I was really happy with it, and I felt I had given it everything I could. I set out to write the best damn novel I could figure out how to write, and the book has won an award for regional fiction, and it was a finalist in another awards. These are sort of the two big independent publisher awards, and so I feel like the response I get from people is that they love the book, that it's a strong story and carries people along. It has its dark moments, but I did get some pressure from my agent early on to make the story more glamorized. She famously said to me one day, poverty is not attractive. I was like, true, but what are you saying? And she wanted me to have Nora go off and become an opera singer in Copenhagen. And I said, but Nora doesn't sing. I mean, Ibsen's Nora is not really a singer.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but what my agent was saying, well, can't you give her a more glamorous life than living in poverty with these, radical students that she comes to know in Christiania and who open her mind? And I couldn't move away from what I saw as the reality of the story. This same woman also said to me at one point, can't you just give up on the whole Ibsen thing? I said, I'm sorry. That's why I'm in the middle of this. I mean, I have so much respect for Ibsen and what he created, and I'm trying to give it life. And so, anyway, I don't really have any regrets, Bill. It's an interesting question, but
I will,
I,
I
I
will
just
say
was,
it's a very good read. It's one of the most enjoyable books I've read. And it's a book that I learned a lot about Norway and the United States and everything from. So it's both interesting and informative. You mentioned an interesting point about Ibsen losing control of his character. Did you ever
yeah.
did you ever lose control of any of your characters, or did they
Oh,
behave?
yes. Oh, yes. Yes. And it's very interesting because it often happens when you're writing dialogue, because I would draft dialogue by trying to imagine an exchange between two people. And sometimes they would say things that were very interesting, but not, but took the conversation off away from what they were supposed to be talking about. And that was interesting to me. I mean, all my characters were very alive for me. I would spend quite a bit of time when I was either running or swimming laps or just trying to go to bed at night, playing the story in my head like a movie, so I could visualize it. And I had to work a bit at visualizing it in the language of the book. That doesn't come that naturally to me. I had to really kind of do that very consciously. Dialogue was easier for me. I think I love theater. I have always loved theater, and because I love that rapid exchange of conversation that is theater. And so, yes, characters get away from you. I had to, well, so Solvi's friend Rika, who's actually based on a person in my life, a cousin I had who was quite haunted and committed suicide in her mid 30s. Rika's not as dark as my cousin was, but Rika became very alive for me. And in fact, I had to keep Rika from taking over Solvi's story, and because it was Solvi's story. And so I had to keep sort of, tamping her down a little bit. And I also had to make Solvi braver and to match her. And that actually worked better. So yes, people do get away from you. Nora, it was interesting though. Nora very much unfolded for me as I imagined her going through these challenges and coming out a different person ultimately. One of the things I was trying to do, and the reason I wrote a novel, was it takes a long time to change a character in a truly organic manner that feels real and is not just she wakes up one day and she's new again, but that her changes grow out of things that happen to her and how she responds, and then how she wishes she had responded differently perhaps. And so she grows in her ability to be self-reflective, and I wanted to really capture that. And so Nora never felt to me like she got away from me, although I did at one point, I gave Nora a Myers-Briggs test and I gave myself one. And this was so I could see the difference between us, because I didn't want Nora to become me. Like, she was Nora, and I'm not like Nora. I'm the Nora that Ibsen created. So I had to make sure that I was not merging her into my own personality. So it was very clear. I kind of kept that sort of clear to me, how she was different than I was, and that was helpful.
And what did you base Nora's second husband on? How did you develop that character?
Well, my husband thinks I based it on him, but I didn't really have a model for him, except so he is the carver who comes from Lillehammer, and he's got some education, but he's grown up on a farm. He's very skilled at how to run a farm, which is something that Nora is one of the first things she admires about him, before she's the least bit romantically interested in him, is that she says at one point, that first summer out on the prairie where they're desperately trying to, grow enough food to get through the next winter, that her husband Torvald back in Norway wouldn't have lasted 2 days on this farm. And yet this guy Anders knows how to, he knows how to build things. He doesn't even need plans. He's got all that in his head. He knows how to make tools. He knows, how to plant. He knows what to do with the soil. And that she is, her mind is kind of opened about what an education is. It's not just what's in books and languages and things like that. It's this whole world of knowledge that she doesn't have. That in fact, Anders' daughter, who later becomes her stepdaughter, his daughter knows a lot more about how to run a farm than Nora does. Nora feels, his daughter sort of says to her at one point, "You're like a troll carrying your head under your arm. Like you really have no idea what you're doing out here." And Nora's like, "You're right, I don't. And I'm sorry because I can see I'm not much help because I don't understand it. And I didn't grow with that." So I wanted to portray someone who was a very skilled person in terms of crafts and farm knowledge, and someone who carried his own self-worth kind of in himself. He is one of the characters that does not transition to America particularly well. And towards the end of the book, he says to Nora something like, I have a foot in each place, and I don't dare go back to Norway, but I can't fully live here in America. Like he says something like it's the immigrant's dilemma. Is like, who are you and where do you really live, and what kind of person are you? So I had heard that and read that in the immigrant literature, that there were many, often men, who didn't quite manage to make the transition to become a full American and, really have command of the English language and stuff like that. So I wanted with him to capture that generation of men who came with with a mixture of optimism and desperation. So that's who he is.
Sonia, if you can unmute yourself. Can you unmute yourself?
There, is that okay?
Okay.
That brings to mind one of my favorite books. It's by the same person who wrote Giants in the Earth.
Rovak, yes.
It's called The Third Life of Per Smavik. And the whole book, it's a slim volume, but the whole book are composed of letters between one brother who has come to America in the Midwest and his brother in Norway, who is wanting to come to America too. And it is just an amazing dialogue through letters about their experiences. And the one in Norway is idealizing what he hears about America. The one in America is saying, hold on, you have to think about what you're going to lose if you come to America. And it's just a very moving, both my parents were immigrants from Norway, and I read the passage to my father one time at the end, and he just said, that is exactly the way I have felt from time to time. But it's a wonderful, if you want to get a sense of what that is about that you were just talking about,
Yeah.
wonderful read. Yeah.
Right. I didn't know about that book. That theme comes up in some of the letters and accounts that I did read in the archives, but that sounds very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think, one of the things that really attracted me to the whole Norwegian immigrant story was that one of the most important themes in Ibsen's writing is the conflict between idealized versions and realistic understanding. And that's the big problem in Doll's House. That's, they both idealize each other and neither one is that person. And that is something that I wanted Nora to really have to come to terms with out on the prairie, was this how do you reckon harsh realities in particular? There's like no way to idealize, you know, what's going on there. It's not a bourgeois world where you can sort of smooth things over and sweep things under the rug and not talk about them so much. I mean, honestly, they didn't talk that much back then either, but they did understand the reality of what they were dealing with, and did not have sort of fairy tale visions of it. And that comes through in the immigrant stories of the people who were trying to farm out there. So
Thank you.
Okay.